Hello and welcome. I'm Darren, and today we're back with some more 7900 XTX versus 4080. So it's kind of a follow-up on the video I did. The first thing I want to do is actually thank the people that have watched that video. I've had quite a lot of feedback on that video. It's actually been quite nice to have that much feedback. Now, I've also had a bit of criticism, which I take on board completely. So I kind of want to put that straight now. I don't expect to get anything out of YouTube. And effectively, I had some equipment. I haven't bought equipment purposely for YouTube. I haven't bought equipment to make content out of YouTube. I'm a gamer. I'm a PC gamer. I purchased a 4080 pretty much around release, and my only intention was to just use it. So I did, after watching a lot of online content, so on and so forth, I ended up buying the 7900 XTX just to kind of, I had an opportunity basically, and I just thought, you know what, I'm going to check it out, and I'm going to see what AMD are up to. The last time I had a AMD GPU was the 6800 XT. And I hadn't tried anything again since. So I had an opportunity to buy one, so I took the opportunity. And once that was done, and I was kind of, getting in some use on both of those GPUs, I kind of thought, you know what, I can probably put up a few videos on YouTube and give people, a bit of my experience. It might help people, it might not. So I don't expect my content to be for everyone. I don't expect everyone to enjoy it. I don't have a lot of time. I don't have the means or know-how of a lot of video editing, so on and so forth. So it is what it is. If you don't like it, I apologise. Maybe at some time I will find a bit more time to sit down and figure things out and obviously sort myself out. But obviously, I haven't been in front of a camera very long. So I know I ramble. I know I'm not the easiest thing to watch. I understand that. It is what it is. That's all I can say at this moment in time. But obviously, getting back to the two GPUs. So obviously, I've had quite a lot of feedback, and I kind of wanted to touch on probably the biggest areas for both GPUs and why I kind of made my decision that the 4080 suits me better, which I want to say again, suits me better. They are both fantastic GPUs. Anyone that's buying either one of these GPUs, I don't think will be far disappointed. I think you'll have a great time regardless of whichever one you buy. So the competition between these GPUs isn't as big as what people make it out to be. And people make it out to be bigger than what it is purely down to the brand. It is down to the brand. Or, not only that, obviously people have bought these GPUs. So a lot of people watch this content that already own these GPUs. And they don't like negativity. They don't want someone to say, okay, this one's better than the one you've got. And it's almost like a self-torture watching a video of someone say, in fact, you should have bought this one. And that's not what I'm saying. Obviously, I'm saying that these GPUs are obviously XTX, the best GPU that AMD have ever made. It might not be the best value. I'd probably argue it probably is the best value. But it's, without any shadow of a doubt, the best GPU AMD have ever made. And you could probably argue that the 4080, I know obviously there's a 4080 Super now. There's not a lot of difference in it other than obviously the 4080 Super was discounted, which made it a better value GPU. But as far as it goes, obviously 4090 is the most powerful GPU Nvidia have made. The 4080 is the one that stepped down from that. So these aren't bad GPUs. And to be fair, there's not really bad GPUs in the market. There's just bad value in GPUs. And I can understand that obviously the instant negativity was towards the 4080 is the bad value. I completely understand that. At the same time, you can probably argue I've purchased both. I didn't pay a lot of difference between them. I only paid about £80, I think it was, between the two. Now, I understand some people, it might be 200, it might be 400, it might be less. They might get them exactly the same price. I don't know. But you could probably argue that I've had better value out the 4080 because I use it more than what I use the 7900 XTX. And the reason that the 4080 suits me better, which I know is going to obviously, it's a trigger warning for some people, is because of DLSS. So obviously the counter argument to that is going through all the comments and fully understanding the comments is the VRAM. So that basically does pretty much sum it up. With the Nvidia GPU, you have the better upscaler, and obviously you have the RT performance if you care for RT. And with the AMD GPU, you have more VRAM. Now, in between that, there's pretty much nothing between them. They pretty much, in most modern benchmarks, are within probably, certainly at the resolution I play at 4K. It's very often that they're within 3 or 4 FPS of each other. It's not very often at all they're within anything more than 10 FPS of each other. So effectively, that's not something that you're ever going to notice. You can notice it in a benchmark, and that's fine. But in your gaming, you're not going to notice the difference between, 64 FPS or 66 FPS. It's a nothing. So we're going to take that out of the equation, and we're going to basically say they are even. And then with the 40, obviously the only other thing is with the 4080, you do have a little bit less power draw, if that means something to you. So then we're going to get into my reason why the upscaler has meant more to me. And the reason that the upscaler has meant more to me than the VRAM is because the VRAM is a hypothetical reason. So the running out of the VRAM hasn't happened. Well, it has in one instance, but the problem is, in the instance that is there for anyone to see, obviously, I spoke about it in the last video, but obviously the first time that I've come across going over the 16 gigabytes of VRAM was in the new Indiana Jones game. Now, the argument against that is, which is the funny thing, it's the one time where the 4080 runs out of VRAM, but the XTX can't do anything better. So the extra VRAM on the XTX didn't put that GPU in a better position, because the XTX can only play 4K supreme settings at whatever it does. Now, the 4080 can play at those exact settings. That's not where it runs out of VRAM. It runs out of VRAM when you throw in the path tracing. So you have to knock down the memory pool, and you're knocking it down from supreme to ultra. So you're still playing 4K ultra with path tracing. It's not a big deal. It's to me, it's a non-argument. It's not like you're playing 4K low. You're still playing 4K ultra with path tracing. Now, I can only suspect, because it's not there to see, so we don't know, but I could only suspect that with the XTX, you'd probably have to put it down to 1440p. And even then, I don't know if you'd pay 1440p supreme settings with path tracing. So unfortunately, the only one area where the XTX has been in a position where it could outperform the 4080 for the VRAM reason, it's a non-starter, because unfortunately it's in a situation where the XTX can't actually perform any better because it can't do the path tracing. So everything else other than that is hypothetical. It's a case of it might run out of VRAM, it might run out, who knows? I mean, there's a very good chance it could, but at the same time, obviously this is now 2 years that I've used it and it hasn't so far. So obviously the reason that I choose to use the 4080 is because that does have an issue, and it is something that I come across all the time. And in the games I play, unfortunately, FSR in quite a lot of the games, because I am reliant on upscalers. So with FSR in quite a few of those games, it's quite bad. And the only kind of real solution to that, if you don't have another in-game solution that's actually any decent, so say XeSS isn't really a solution, or basically any other option you've got is pretty bad, your best option at that point is to start dropping settings. So I've been in obviously quite a few situations, especially on Unreal Engine 5 games, because you have to take into account that a lot of the new Unreal Engine 5 games are releasing with these upscalers now as the anti-aliasing solution. So a lot of them don't have TAA. Obviously, MSAA is just too. It's too. What's the word? It takes too much FPS. It's quite it's quite powerful to use. So, or should I say, it takes quite a lot of power to use. So obviously, your TAA solutions in a lot of Unreal Engine 5 games have gone, which is leaving you with XeSS. TSR is obviously the one that is like the Unreal Engine 5 one. And then obviously you've got your DLSS if you're using a Nvidia GPU, or you've got obviously FSR if you're on the AMD GPU. Obviously, you don't have to use the FSR if the TSR or the XeSS are working well. But if they're no better, and a lot of the times they're not. TSR, I think, probably one of the first games I tried it kind of was all right. And XeSS is normally been the option that a lot of AMD users use, but in the last couple of games I've tried both of those, and those weren't very good either. So with the XTX, what I've actually found, and it's fine, I'm not going to make a huge deal out of it, but I ended up actually dropping the settings to play the game. So obviously, instead of playing at 4K Ultra settings or 4K Ultra Plus, I was dropping a lot down to like 4K Medium to try and get some performance back. On the 4080, however, I could stay at 4K Ultra, and then I could just use DLSS at quality, and that would give me the performance of dropping the XTX down to medium. That kind of makes it a bit of a stupid thing, because I'm dropping the settings on the XTX, and the XTX is the GPU that has got the more VRAM to run the high settings, but I have to drop the settings to try and gain the performance back. So obviously then the counter argument is, well, you shouldn't be playing them at 4K. Well, if I'm not using either of these GPUs at 4K, then I don't need this much VRAM. So it's kind of a never-ending argument. Someone will always have something to say. There's always a response, because no one really ever wants to take what you're saying at face value, which is fine. It's not a problem. But it is where we're at now. If you want to use these GPUs and you want to play at 4K, and you play a certain type of game, especially obviously if you want to play some of the newer ones, you have obviously, you don't have a choice. A lot of these new Unreal Engine 5 games are pretty much aimed at, from what I've seen in the last couple of games, it seems that they're aimed at 60 FPS native 4K for a 4090. So generally the 4080 and the XTX fall in at around about 45 FPS. A lot of the new games that I've played recently, you're about 45 FPS. So obviously with the 4080, you can crank on DLSS at quality, and that will take you over your 60. With the AMD GPU, if FSR doesn't look good or XeSS isn't an option, sometimes TSR I don't think is even there, but even if TSR it doesn't look that great, then you're either choosing one of those and you're just going to live with the fact that it doesn't look as good as, you do have that visual degradation, or you start to drop some settings, and depending on how bad it is, and I'm going to show you actually in this video, we will go through a couple of cases. Now these are the worst. They're probably as bad as it gets in this. Well, to be fair, I have seen worse in a few situations, but these are probably two quite bad ones. But obviously, I don't, even while I'm obviously making this video at the moment, I don't know how these are going to come across on YouTube by the time YouTube has done its compression and all the rest of it. So I've tried my best to record these at the highest that I could. Just these two games, just to show the issues that I have in these two games and why I chose to drop the settings on the XTX rather than keep the settings high and be able to use an upscaler, because these were just two situations where the upscalers were kind of quite distracting, and in the end it was just better off to just drop the settings. So like I said, with the 4080, I don't get that problem. The other reason is, with the 4080, I actually prefer, and this is exactly the same in these two videos, DLSS to me is the best option. So 4K DLSS at quality is to me in both of these games is nicer than running native. One of the first game that I'll probably put up is Escape from Tarkov. Now, that's a big game for me. So I've got quite a lot of hours in that. And I already had the 4080. I had the 4080 a long time before I bought the XTX. So obviously, once I bought the XTX, I obviously downloaded all the games that I already had on the 4080 on the XTX, and I sat down and I started playing them, and instantly these problems were noticeable to me instantly. And I ended up trying to have a mess around, trying to have a fix with it, because I was used to playing these games on the 4080. And that's what I say, that's when I realised that I was just going to have to drop graphic settings to get through them. If these reasons don't bother you, that's totally fine. You can play them with the upscalers. I'm not saying you can't play with the upscalers. What I'm saying is, when you're in a situation like where I am, where I have the 4080 system sat there and I have the 7900 XTX system sat there, I can use whichever one I think is best. I end up using the 4080, and it is because of this reason. So that's kind of where these videos were about. I'm not saying that one of these GPUs is bad. I'm not getting into all of that childish bullshit. They're both very good. But what I'm saying is, when I'm in a situation of which one am I using, I'm using the 4080 most, because the games that I personally play, I'm finding I'm needing to use the upscalers. Now, the reason to have the XTX, or the main argument for the XTX, is that I'm going to run out of VRAM, and that just hasn't happened. So, you know, I mean, I can understand someone might buy it of the fear that they're going to run out of VRAM, and I'm not saying that you're not going to. But what I'm saying is, it's not a very good argument for me, because that's not where I've got the problem. The problem that I've got is when I'm using both of those, the problem that I do actually have is the upscaler thing. And like I said, DLSS in some of these videos just actually provides me with a nicer image. I actually want to play with DLSS. Sometimes it's not even a case of I need to use it for the performance. It's actually a case of that gives me the nicer, cleaner image. So if you're affected by like anti-aliasing, I know a lot of people will start saying that, you know, you're being a pussy because it's just a little bit of flickering or whatever. I don't like it. I find it distracting, and I actually find it like quite, I'm not going to say irritating on my, it gives me like tired eyes. It does literally, after a while I find it quite distracting, and I find myself getting like a bit like a migrainey, headachy thing. So if I'm playing in a game long, like I said, Tarkov is my main game. Now, like I said, this is all dependent on me. If you play different games, that's totally fine. If I played, for instance, if I played COD, then the XTX would be the better GPU for me. I can tell you that straight away, because there's actually quite a big gap. You know, that's a big outlier for AMD. COD does work extremely well on the XTX, and the performance it has over the 4080 is quite a lot. So it's not just, that's one outlier where it's not just like 10 FPS or something like that. It's actually quite a lot. So if that was my main game, the XTX I would be using all the time, and the 4080 would be gathering dust. But unfortunately, that's not my main game. So that's why I say, buy the GPU that suits you, and a lot of that will depend on the games that you play. But obviously, so I don't drag this video out for too long, we'll get into a couple of the games now. I'm just going to quick go through, obviously, native, what it looks like with DLSS, my thoughts on that, and obviously what it looks like on FSR. And hopefully that kind of, hopefully it will come through on YouTube, and hopefully you'll get to actually say, there's something behind what I'm saying, and there's a reason behind what I'm saying. I'm not just obviously talking bullshit or being a child about it. I don't care. At the moment, like I said, the 4080 for me is the GPU that I use the most out of it. Now, if next year AMD, I know it's probably not going to happen next generation, but say the generation after that, AMD bring out a GPU that's better than the Nvidia GPU, well, I'll end up using the AMD GPU, because I'm not going to, you know, use a worse GPU just because it's a brand that I've attached myself to. I find that really childish and really shit. So that's not happening. Like I said, these are just my reasons for now. Something that I thought I'd share with YouTube. Hopefully it will come in helpful for someone. Hopefully it won't. But before I ramble on for too long and get moaned at in the comments, I'll throw the videos up, quick go through them. Well, I'll try to go through them quite quick and then see what you think. And then that'll end it there. So if you did watch, I appreciate it. I know I need to get better. That's fine. And yeah, if you liked it, please give me a like, because it does make a difference. And I'll catch you in the next one. So this is my first example, and this is probably a big one for me, because for quite a few years this has probably been one of the games that I personally spend the most much time in, and this is Escape from Tarkov. So as you can see at the moment, we are running, well, we're going to the settings, but we're running at 4K, and we are using DLSS at quality. You can see obviously all of the details, fences, everything. There's no kind of anti-aliasing. We've got all our power lines. Everything is... It is a 4K image, obviously. Everything is kind of pretty clean and pretty good. So, and everything holds up in movement absolutely fine. Yeah, so if we go to yes, so obviously all of our settings, everything's 4K, everything's at high. DLSS we were on at quality, so let's turn that off. Let's go to TAA high, which is our basically our native 4K. And as you can see, everything is probably not too much dissimilar. I find this image a sharper image, and there is some kind of not great anti-aliasing in certain circumstances. But obviously, as you can see, with using these settings, what we don't have in this instance is great performance. So there's a bit of anti-aliasing there where the barbed wire kind of disappears. This probably isn't the best example. I have tried this recording multiple times, and unfortunately this game is becoming a nightmare to screen capture. But probably not too much of a dissimilar image. This image I find sharper. So DLSS definitely softens the image, but I think that's probably more down to DLSS having some work to do in the way of removing some of the anti-aliasing, so some of the sharp image. So if we just go back, I mean, you can see the details aren't that bad. You were losing a bit of detail over the top of like the ring over the top of that. I'm going to guess DLSS probably brings that back. Back to quality. Let's have a look. Yeah, so you can see that that ring is now appeared back again. So I'm not surprised, because that's kind of the details that get lost with bad anti-aliasing. So all of that barbed wire you can see is very clean. DLSS to me is just a slightly softer, but it retains more detail that's lost through TAA. It's a lot more stable image. So the image which is kind of the worst, we'll just quickly check it out. Unfortunately, see, we have two versions of FSR in this. So we have 2.2 and we have 3.0, so we'll go with the newest one. They both actually look very similar. I don't really notice any difference between the both of them in this game. And as you can see, the biggest problem with FSR is very sharp in this game, but the biggest problem that you get with it, I'm not sure if... No, you're going to see it now. It's not the... We're not in the windiest situation, but the ghosting in the tree is bad. Very bad. We're not in a high wind situation at the moment. It sounds like it may be picking up a little bit. So you can see if you're stationary for any amount of time, which you will be in this game, because you're obviously fighting other people, but you can see the smearing that begins to happen. And like I said, the more kind of movement that you get in the trees, the worse it becomes. The whole image just becomes sharper. Everything looks kind of a bit, to my eyes, over sharpened in this image now, where it kind of loses detail because everything kind of, I don't know, it almost like everything becomes one thing. It's not individualized anymore, if that makes sense. But like I said, it is what it is. You can kind of see here where there's a lot of ghosting, and then obviously this tree here, it just, everything just smears and leaves kind of smear lines and stuff. So unfortunately, that's like worst case scenario. There's some anti-aliasing along here. And then what you do get on movement is you can see like all of the grass, just anti-aliases. So everything is like, it's not particularly nice image, if I'm being honest. We'll go back to DLSS. Like I said, this is just one scenario, so and everything is now as it should be. Obviously, if I leave it, you can see there's no tree ghosting or smearing or anything going on. Obviously, there's a lot of movement because the wind's just picked up just as I decided to turn that FSR off. But you can see the grass doesn't anti-alias on movement. We go by this tree. The tree, you can see the trees moving next to me. They're all stable. They're all the same. They're all keeping very good detail. Like I said, you can see the details are held here. Just everything is a very clean, stable image. So I would choose personally, and I do choose in this game, even if I didn't need the extra performance. If I was running at 200 FPS at native, I would still play this game with DLSS because it is a better anti-aliasing solution than what TAA is. TAA is just too sharp in this game. In fact, let's just go back now that the wind's got a little bit worse and see if it's affected. So yeah, you can see now it's pretty bad. There's ways around it. The thing with this game is you're not going to be, with using these settings, you're not going to be at 60 FPS, and this isn't a game that you particularly want to be below 60 FPS. So on the AMD GPU, it's just a case of dropping some of the graphics settings down. Because you're not going to want to run FSR at this. You're going to want to run native. As you can see, you're not going to want to play the game like that. That kind of makes me feel quite ill. So I believe last time I checked, let me just check, because something might have been changed. I think FSR 2.2 did the same thing. Yes, it does. So there's no real way around it. Unfortunately, FSR just does not work in this game. The details are so fine, it's very hard for it to work. So you'd have to, on the AMD GPU, you just have to drop the graphics settings down to reach your 60 and go with TAA. Which, I mean, admittedly, see, TAA breaks up a bit. It's not, that's what I'm, like, you see all of this detail, and this is a very hard situation for it to cope with. It almost looks like it maybe does ghost a bit with TAA. It probably holds up best out of everything with FS. Like, this is a bad situation because you've got a lot of very fine detail thrown all around, but it actually holds up best with DLSS in this situation. So, without any shadow of a doubt, in this game, the best way to play it is with DLSS. And and it's how I play it. Like I said, it's how I choose to play it. So this is just one example. We won't stay around much longer. We've seen whatever we need to see, and we'll just move on to the next game. So this is our next game that we're going to check out. This is a Black Myth Wukong, game of the year for me, but regardless of that. So what we're looking at right now is 4K, high, I can't remember what graphics settings it's at. We're not using frame gen, so we've taken frame gen out. We're not going to use RT. We're just going to go with like the high settings and check out DLSS, and then we'll check out TSR, and then we'll check out FSR quickly and go through them. But obviously this is DLSS. Again, in this game, I'm not going to say that anything is perfect in this game. This is a really hard game. And it's because the amount of fine detail it has. Especially in kind of this color. It's just quite awkward. So you can kind of see in this image, it's Black Myth Wukong. It is what it is. There's no kind of it's very hard to say if there's any type of anti-aliasing. You've just got fine detail and it's all moving. So it almost will appear to give you maybe a bit of an anti-aliasing look. There's no real way around that. What we do, the biggest problem that this game suffers with is motion blur when there's no motion blur on, which DLSS seems to hold up better with. And that's probably about it. Other than that, DLSS seems to retain detail without losing too much, and we don't get too much in motion blur. So probably the biggest thing to keep an eye on, which makes it more obvious than anything else, is my little headset feathers. Then you can kind of see if we stop in this situation, there's a lot of stuff flying around on the screen. You can still see that we're keeping all of our image retention, and our headpiece isn't doing anything crazy. We'll just run back in here. It's a very sharp image. I'm not quite sure. It's obviously the art style that they went with Black Myth Wukong. The one thing about this game is, more than anything, it is quite fast-paced. So very different from what we were, obviously, Tarkov before. This is almost like the exact opposite of Tarkov. So let's get into the settings. So as you can see, we're at DLSS. We're at 65. We should be 67. But every time I change it to 67, I'll go in and out the menu and it'll drop it to 65. So I'm going to leave it there so that we stay consistent. So we have turned frame generation off. We've turned ray tracing off because we are literally just doing, we're just going with comparison on your kind of native, nothing interfering image. So DLSS, we will go to FSR. Obviously, we're at 65%, so we're using, everything's exactly the same. But this is the biggest thing that I noticed with FSR. So it does go a bit blurry, like the game detail. You can see kind of a bit of aliasing, but it's nothing crazy. But what we do get is, obviously, this, you can see, obviously, the objects that are flying around on screen at the moment. There's a lot of ghosting. There's a lot of ghosting in the feathers on top of my head. So unfortunately, that's where FSR does suffer in this game. You can see when we're running into this area, the overall image blurs a bit. Give it time and it'll sharpen back up again. But so you have a kind of, obviously, a bit of a blurriness, and then you have this ghosting
motion detected at the front door
on the headpiece, which is really quite bad. When you start to notice it, it's not great. It's not horrendous, You can play with it, just don't play with this suit on. Or just play with a different helmet on and you're good to go. Like I said, we'll go back to DLSS. We won't bother with TSR. There's no point. And you don't get that problem. Now, I'm not saying that there is no problem there at all. And maybe if I slowed it down at like slow speed, there might be a bit of a problem. I don't know. But it definitely doesn't have anything like the issue that you have with FSR. And you can see when we move into this area, everything still looks quite clean. Nothing goes like crazy blurry. And these flying objects are all, again, they might do something if you slow them down at slow speed, but nothing that's as obvious as what we had when we were running FSR. So there isn't a perfect solution in this. TSR does some kind of very strange... let's get to it. TSR does, like, if you look at those trees above my head, it has like a artifacting, so it does have a bit more ghosting than what it's got less ghosting on my headgear, but it has random artifacting. You can kind of see it up, even in the tree up there. You can see it in the tree, even in that one, where it's not even in the fine details. You can see it in the branches. So you can you can see it all in the if you look up at the framework and the ladders up there. There's all sort of like yeah, I wouldn't say it's an artifacting. It seems to be losing detail and then loading it back in again. It's all a bit strange. You can kind of see it up there. So TSR is alright. It's not perfect. Again, this is probably just another game. What it does do is it holds the like all that cliff image doesn't go blurry when you run towards it, which is quite good. So obviously looking through this little archway, you can see that cliff in the back, and as you're running towards it, it holds the detail of that quite well. I think with FSR it just blurred it a bit. So yeah, it goes a bit blurry. It's not terrible. I don't know what DLSS does. It maybe does it somewhere in between. Let's have a look. It's just the ghosting, obviously, you can see with FSR. So it stays pretty sharp with DLSS. So unfortunately, FSR kind of loses out in this one quite badly from the blurriness it kind of causes on fast movements, and then obviously this motion blur. Maybe the blurriness is something that it's doing to try and is kind of a result of what it's trying to fix. So what I will say is there's nothing perfect in this game. Do you know what I mean? This is a worst case scenario, a really hard game to fix anti-aliasing in because of all the very, very fine detail. When you look at the grass in this, the fine details are huge. So we'll move on to the next game.